As noted, my name is Simon Bendel from Mitchell Dash. I've had the privilege of being involved in the Clifton to Tangoya Coastal Hazard Strategy work in Hawke's Bay as a project manager for that the past few years. Some of you may have been to the MFE guidance document workshops and seen the, have we got two microphones to go as well? There we go, thank you. And seen the video I did of every complaints from folks about that music being stuck in their heads. So I won't play that today, I promise. I'll just be asked today. I'm joined by an excellent panel from various councils around the Lower North Island. On my left here is Chris Dolly from Hawke's Bay Regional Council, Nikki Williams from Kapiti Coast District Council, Dr. Ian Dorr from Greater Wellington Regional Council, and Jackie Hasty from Melbourne City Council. Look, we have a great panel here today. We've all had different experiences in the space. We'll try and tackle the topic in three areas. First, each of our panellists will run through a bit of a hopefully 5-minute presentation on their projects, their lessons learned to date and some challenges ahead. We'll then break into a bit of a panel discussion on some key questions in the space. And then if I can manage our time, we'll make sure about 15 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. I'm sure there'll be a few, so we'll try and run it in that way. So look, I won't talk any further. Chris, can I hand to you straight away and get into your project overview? Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. So Simon mentioned Simon's been involved in the Clifton to Tangoya project for a number of years now, and I really can't claim a lot of credit at all, having only been involved for the past 4 weeks. So if there's any tricky questions, we've got some participants in the audience who might call on as well. So I'll just suss this out. So really, just to understand the context of where the Clifton to Tangoya study is, it's based around Napier, from Clifton up to Tangoya. It's an area of about 40 kilometres along the coast. The vision of the project was that coastal communities, businesses and critical infrastructure from Tangoya to Clifton are resilient to the effects of coastal hazards. And I think that's really important when we saw some of the earlier presentations show that Hawke's Bay actually has a pretty significant exposure, particularly around infrastructure. It also has a number of current issues, and a number of the residents have a good awareness of the issues around climate change. So we've been re-nourishing West Shore Beach for quite some time now due to erosion. It is still an active coast after the major earthquake in 1931. It is still finding its feet, and there is a fair amount of change. We saw a video earlier around the houses in Hamawana who are impacted through storm surge and storm events. We're also rebuilding some previous hard structures providing protection, and that's currently funded 100% by the Napier City Council for a small area of the coast. There's a general heightened level of awareness due to the Port of Napier currently expanding and going through a consenting process, and the various experts being involved in that around different scenarios around the coastal processes. And also erosion at Clifton, quite stark there, removing basically the whole access way to a motor camp. The scope is around coastal erosion and coastal inundation out to 2120. It specifically hasn't looked at tsunami, which is another major hazard, and it has not included groundwater. Napier particularly is at risk from groundwater rise, and certainly I think that would be included in future iterations of the project. Oops. Just need to get it backwards. There we go. So really, for that area of the coast, inundation is the real threat. There's a bit of a slide there showing that under a 1 metre sea rise, say in 100 years' time, the entire area, that's Tiawonga settlement, there's a significant impact to that settlement. So it's really a serious issue for parts of the coast. This particular project has been running for around 5 years and has had a number of stages. Back in 2014, it was really formulating the context and establishing the project. 2015 was focused on hazard evaluation and risk assessments. 2016 really looked at the decision-making framework of the project. Last year, 2017, there was significant public consultation, which I'll go through in a bit more detail shortly, through the evaluation panels, looking at options going forward. And we're now in stage 4, which is the implementation stage, which is actually a big stage in itself. There's a fair amount of work to do to look at, I guess, testing and planning around those pathways and to check that they're affordable, to do some more community consultation and approval processes, and then set up a program for implementing the pathways. So there's a lot of work there to go. Probably another 2 to 3 years to get through that process. Our particular project, Simon is an independent project manager, and that's been a real benefit to have someone with a single focus to keep things running over that period of time, and also that continuity. We have a joint committee that consists of 2 councillors from each of the organisations, which is Hastings District Council, Napier City Council, and Hawke's Bay Regional Council, plus 1 member each from the 3 post-settlement governance entities. We also have a technical advisory group that consists of many of the engineers and planners from each organisation, and we bring on expert consultants as required. So really into the assessment panels, this was really a significant piece of work, and we had significant community involvement. The project divided the study area into 16 coastal units, and then created, I guess, 2 major panels, one for the northern area and one for the southern area. So the areas were grouped with interrelated coastal processes, and we also wanted to make sure that each council was involved in both of those panels. And we had members from Mana Whenua coastal communities, the wider inland communities, business interests, DOC, and representative of lifelines and critical infrastructure again. So each panel consisted of around 20 voting members, had a number of observer participants, which was additional councillors and treaty settlement representatives, and there was about 10 support roles with the chair, facilitator. So each group was about 35 people large. It was supported by a number of studies and investigations, so coastal hazards assessment, coastal risk assessments, cultural values, social impact, and really real options analysis, looking at what options could realistically be looked at in each location. And there was a very structured approach to take that group through 11 workshops, plus some additional technical sessions and public presentations as well. So very structured with key activities to be undertaken at each one of those workshops. It culminated at the end in all of those panel members actually signing off on the final report, which was a really important step, that everyone was aligned and endorsed the outcome together. So really on to some of our challenges, and this one's a big one. Hasn't been solved yet for our study area, and that is, what entity or entities will oversee the execution of the plan. There's still a lot of discussion around who should take that role on. How will it be rated for? Should we be rating the areas at risk? Should we be rating the whole area? Should we be rating people who contribute to climate change? Or should we only be rating the people who are impacted by it? Will there be any assistance from central government? A lot of members have told me that it's going to be unaffordable and we need the support of central government. Part of the next step will actually be to put some firm numbers around those pathways so we can make that assessment. And how will the funding components of private and public contributions actually work in reality? So a lot of challenges there. And on to our key learnings. Really one is with the amount of technical assessment and community engagement of this scale, and remembering this is only a portion of the coastline, only a 40-kilometre portion. This project will take about 7 years to complete, currently in the 5th year, so that's a significant undertaking. Certainly to engage a wide range of panel members with differing views. I guess initially there's a lot of excitement from the people at risk, but we also want to understand from other elements of the community. We do need to give time to panel members to present their view and try different methods to do that, including talking to people individually, because not everyone likes to speak in front of the whole crowd, or they might have a view that's different to the majority. And there's certainly a lot of work to do once the pathway is determined. Some people have expressed, isn't it great we've actually got these pathways, but there's actually still years of work to translate them to a specific program. There's also a high level of interest, but because of the intensive involvement, there is less interest to actually be involved through the whole process. And people putting together teams might want to consider some spares or backup members, because it's unlikely that everyone will be involved for the entire period. And it's been really useful to have a dedicated project manager to keep everything on track and not one of the 20 things that they're trying to juggle. So really that's it from Hawke's Bay, and we'll pass you to back to Simon to introduce our next guest.
Kia ora koutou katoa. So I want to talk to you about Wellington City Council's adaptation planning program. So we kicked off our planning for adaptation with Markera Beach. As you can see, it's a small, quite remote community. This is just 20 minutes outside of Wellington. Markera Beach residents had a big storm surge event earlier this year. And they know that they're vulnerable to rising sea levels and flooding. As you can see, we've got great sea views, estuary at the side and a river at the back. So following that event, they asked Wellington City Council for some help to prepare for this happening again. This was a great opportunity for us to launch our sea level rise engagement plan, and it allows us to pilot and plan for how we can work with other communities. We know we have a lot of suburbs facing a lot more water in years to come. So Markera Beach is an exposed coastal village with one road access. The residents aren't on the grid for wastewater, stormwater or drinking water. So they're used to being quite self-sufficient, and they are a resilient bunch. Our engagement process, has been based on the lessons from the Hawke's Bay experience, and we're following the Ministry for the Environment's guidelines. So we've created our own version of the community-led collaborative approach, or as I like to call it, the Markera United Nations General Assembly. And because of its size and location, there are fewer stakeholders, and therefore we're running a short, focused project here. So we have 6 workshops in total over 6 months, and we're 3 workshops into that as of this week. Our key challenge at the moment is probably getting our community representatives to understand that the event that they've had before, the one that they had in February this year, is not the event that they need to plan for the future. That the next storm surge or flooding won't be the same as the last one. Some of our key lessons, there's a few I'd like to share. Firstly, the engagement like this is hugely rewarding, but it's also hugely time consuming. Don't underestimate the amount of time it takes to set this process up. Getting the right people, not the most qualified or the self-promoting people, is essential. Booking venues, organising the right speakers, sequencing the workshops, booking catering, updating online portals, organising car parks. There's just endless administrivia involved, and you need to be resourced up to deal with this. It does take a lot of time. I'd say relationship building is critical, and and that's really time well spent, and I can talk about this a bit more later if it's of interest. We found it critical to have iwi hapu involvement and input. We have people who represent mana whenua on our panel, and we've had Murray Love, who's the chair of the Wellington Tents Trust, join us as part of our technical advisory group. Murray's been able to give us cultural advice and share his knowledge in the same way as some of our other subject matter experts have been, like Niwa, Tonkina Taylor and Regional Council. That's worked really well and has been a powerful influencing and leadership role that he's played. And lastly, I'd say that our experience has been talking about sea level rise in scenarios. So whether you talk about 30 centimetres, half a metre, 1 metre, it works and it's easier rather than talking about dates and time frames. Using scenarios has allowed us to acknowledge that there's uncertainty of what will happen when, but it doesn't let that be a barrier to the planning.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I think some of the earlier presenters have pretty much summed up where we're at Kapiti Coast. We've been involved in the litigation relating to coastal hazard provisions and zones, and we've tried, and I guess at the time failed, to really engage with our community. And through that process, really, we lost the trust of a sector of our community, and so now we're trying to start again and really think about how we can move through and address the issues of coastal hazards. I have a little bit of brief footage of our coast, which really, I guess, is no different to large parts of New Zealand and other councils where we are facing the issues of what is going to happen over time. And as a very brief bit of history, in the 1950s and 70s along our coast, we were subject to storms and coastal erosion. And at that time, the council built some seawalls. And since then, we have maintained and rebuilt those walls at Paikokariki, Raumete and Paraparaumu. In 2003, we first prepared a report about coastal hazard zones, and this was challenged by the community. So as a result of that, we had it peer reviewed, and following that peer review in 2008 and 2012, we undertook further coastal hazard assessments and developed new coastal hazard lines and erosion zones. At the time, these showed where the shoreline would potentially be in 50 years and 100 years, and it affected about 1,800 properties within that 100-year zone. I might need some help here. Get it going. These lines were included on our land information memorandums, and I'm sure many of you will know this led to the High Court case, the Ware case. And although I knew about the Ware case, I guess I didn't realise perhaps how significant it was until I was here at a previous Climate Change Symposium, where I suddenly realised that all the planning students and law students around the country still study the Ware case today. And then in 2014, our council also made the decision to withdraw those coastal hazard lines and zones and the policy sections from our proposed district plan. This led to 2 further Environment Court declarations and a High Court decision, which really was about the process we then followed to remove those provisions. So I guess one of the key lessons we've learned is the importance of taking the community with you and ensuring that there are no surprises. At the same time, the council passed a resolution in 2008 that it would protect private assets but not public assets along the coast. And so we have work that continues to be done on our sea walls. And within the next 10 years of our LTP, we'll spend $22 million on coastal protection. Over the last 6 months, we have been working with the Regional Climate Change Working Group, which is a group of elected members from the region, of councillors and mayors. Really, it looks at the broad issue of climate change, but is also focused on coastal hazards. And as such, we are looking at developing a specific plan for the region, looking at the community-led approach. We are anticipating that this will follow the Hawke's Bay example. The community-led approach in Hawke's Bay does seem to have been successful in creating pathways for each community. The focus appears to be about thinking about the vulnerability of those coastal communities and how it impacts on each of those districts. It's important for us that we work with the community to develop strategies for the future. In Kapiti, time has moved on since 2014, and we need to think about the effects of climate change not just on our assets but also on all of the community. The MFP guidance helps with the process for collaboration. We are hopeful that we will be able to establish a dialogue with the community, but we do have some challenges ahead of us. As staff, we're busy at the moment trying to understand the science, make sure we have a clear council strategy. We're working with the region to look at the community-led process, and we're also hoping we'll have support through this from central government. We propose to progress the regional approach and try and engage with the community. At the moment, I think Ian will probably talk a little bit more about that. We've agreed to do a vulnerability risk assessment for the region, and once that's completed, we will then move into talking to the community.
Kia ora koutou. My name's Ian Dorr. I'm the Regional Natural Hazards Analyst at Greater Wellington Regional Council, and I've been in this role for around 12 years now, and I just wanted to provide a little bit of a regional perspective on some of the bigger issues that regional councils often have to deal with in our day-to-day jobs. So at a regional level, we have a mandate to have a look at the impacts that natural hazards have on our communities, on the natural environment, on our built environments, and many of my colleagues in regional councils will appreciate the magnitude of some of the issues that we have to deal with. So just focusing on the Wellington region that the Greater Wellington Regional Council oversees, we've got around 500 kilometres of shoreline, over 2,000 kilometres of rivers, with 30 major active faults, and all of these hazards that accrue from that are going to be exacerbated by climate change to some degree or another. Many people think that seismic hazards are somehow separate from climate change, but in fact there are overlaps, and one of those overlaps is in liquefaction. In the map there in the bottom corner, some of those red areas are areas that are only under 2 metres elevation. A lot of our communities have been built on low-lying floodplains around coasts. They're on loose, unconsolidated soils with high ground tables. As sea level pushes up those ground tables, they're going to become more susceptible to liquefaction. And you may have seen in the news this morning, in Japan, they've had a big cyclone event. The ground is saturated, you add an earthquake on top of that and you've got land slipping. So there are overlaps that we have to think about. It became apparent to me pretty quickly coming into this job after coming out of the science and consulting sector that effective long-term hazards management requires cooperation across multiple agencies, and that therein lies some of the big challenge, because often it's the structural difficulties within our own organisations that creates barriers to how we deal with these issues. So some of the key challenges really is that our modes of development, our patterns and scale of development, the way in which we draw up our property boundaries, they're fixed. Our infrastructure is fixed. But unfortunately, Mother Nature and the natural environment is not that fixed. And we have problems when we try to react to this because we're not that dynamic. We might be intellectually, we might be able to have the discussions about it and be flexible as humans, but unfortunately the way we've built our built environments is not that easy to move. And so 50 years ago or so, when we had the big post-war building boom, that was fine. We sort of thought the climate and the natural environment was reasonably fixed. But in the last few years, we've come to realise that actually it's not that fixed. It's extremely dynamic. We live in an incredibly dynamic country geologically and climate-wise. And sea level rise in particular is going to be impacting a lot of our communities that have built in the last 50, 60 years, and a lot of those boundaries are now getting eaten into. And so that is one of the big challenges that we face, is that the past is not so much going to be a guide to the future anymore because it's changing so much. There's been high investment in a lot of these areas because they've been flat often, but also in an incredibly mountainous environment like we have across a lot of this region as well. We've had no other choice but to build into hillsides as well. And so around 5 or 6 years ago it became apparent that we're going to have a much more joined up approach across our councils. And so I started working with a colleague of mine and another council to sit down and have a discussion about what we might do about this. And we realised is that a lot of our planning is not aligned. A lot of the things that we're doing, we're undertaking research projects, we're getting different results, we're using different methodologies. And when it became apparent that perhaps we need to have a regional joined up hazard strategy, that we can start facilitating those discussions, and that's what we did. We started that process around 5 or 6 years ago, and this is a demonstration of how long it can take to get a bunch of councils and agencies to agree on what we're going to be doing. So last year we managed to get, by and large, most of the councils to approve that strategy and for us to start facilitating those discussions. So we're in the implementation phase of that now, and what it's been able to do is it's been able to enable us to have those really difficult conversations. And one of the things that we wanted to have through that strategy was a cross-council working group that can be talking about things like climate change and natural hazards, and that's exactly what we've been able to achieve through this. Working with colleagues within my council as well, we released a big report last year on downscaling our climate change impacts, and that just lit a fire. And so all of a sudden, councils are talking together, and we've been able to, he mentioned the climate change working group, and there's a subgroup within that that is looking at coastal adaptation strategies and driving that forward politically. And there's no way we would have achieved that 5 years ago. Part of that is some of this groundwork that we've been laying, but also I think there's been a greater awareness through climate change impacts that we've seen in our own communities in the last few years. So some of the key learnings out of this is that it needs, these kind of processes, they need support, and it needs to be ongoing, and it needs the backing of managers and decision makers, because often we can talk about this at an officer level, but unless you've got the support from managers who might have the budgets, unless you've got support at a political level, we can talk all we like at a staff level and we're never going to get anywhere with it. I've often seen it before. We've got these grand ideas, but they just sit on the shelf and go nowhere. By that same token, you need to give the confidence in your managers and in the political decision makers that we're going down the right track, and that takes building up trust both ways. And it's been nice that we've been talking about some of that even in the last session. You need good science. I mean, that's a given. And when I say science, I mean in the broadest sense. There's a lot of knowledge that people have in communities that have built up over a number of years, Māori and Māori, and then the nuts and bolts, figures and graphs and analysis. You need that, because that's what you're going to be basing your decisions on. But even more than that, you need to be able to communicate that science. Often I've seen situations around the country where you just scratch your head and you think, how could you not think that there was a high hazard risk? How could we have a decision that has to be fought all the way through the Environment Court? And often where that missing puzzle is that, and I've been in this space in academia and in consultancy where you produce a report, you give it to the council, and then there's sort of nothing happens. there's this kind of missing gap there with communicating what that actually means. And this is where it takes some quite courageous discussions, because you can do the science, you can communicate it, but that's the tricky part. You then have to sit down and decide, what are we going to do with that science? What are we going to do with the implications of that? So we need to understand us and our communities, because often that's where what we're finding increasingly, what I'm finding is that we're butting up against all those kind of values that people have, our cognitive biases, the fact that we've invested so heavily in our homes and properties. These are livelihoods we're affecting, so it's a human problem that we're dealing with. And it takes honesty, it takes respect, and it takes courage. And it was nice to hear in the last session that people were talking about the fact you've got to be brave, and it's so true. But you need to treat those situations with honesty and respect and integrity, because I've been in meetings where you just come under fire at local government level and you just wear a lot of heat, you're extremely emotional, and that's totally understandable. But the important thing is that you can't kind of take that personally and start having a slagging match back, because you'll just totally lose people at that, and I don't need to tell you that. So you need to remain calm under fire and keep those conversations honest and real. And that's all I have to say.
I'll stay sitting for this part and I'll fire some questions to my left here, but I think what I learned from that really is probably three things. The first is how challenging this space is. We're all battling with this key question of how to engage our communities. Secondly, I think how much we can learn from each other, and I guess as a result, the third thing, how important forums like this are to share those learnings. Look, I'll start with a question for you, Nikki, as you're closest to me. How do you work out who should participate in planning to manage coastal hazards and what role they should play?
Well, certainly at CAFD, this is something that we have been thinking about very closely and having some great debates amongst our staff recently. Really, we are wanting to move forward with the community to talk about coastal hazards. And one of the key things is thinking about what the purpose of that engagement is and what do we want to achieve. We've used the MFE guidance, I guess, as a bit of a starting point, looking at the spectrums of participation from, informing, which is maybe in the past where our council has sort of landed some of this work, rather than really thinking about collaborating with the communities. So really some of the big questions are, how do we run a transparent process, making sure that we select a clear panel. Do we nominate seats for people, or do we call for nominations? So we're just sort of working through that at the moment. And then also realising that we have different sectors of society. We heard speakers earlier talk about different socio-economic groups, and we certainly have that across our district. And also, that the whole of the community is involved in some of the responses that may come out of those decisions. And then that some people are disproportionately disadvantaged, I think is some of the terminology we've come across and what that really means. I mean, we do have groups in our community, the Field Council, I guess, have targeted them or let them down. As recently as yesterday, we had a council meeting where the council unanimously agreed to progress the joint approach for the community-led process. But we also had comment from one of our community groups that they're not very enamoured with the MFE guidelines, that they feel yet again it's planners and scientists that are directing the community. So we certainly have, I'm not sure if exactly identified who should participate, but we certainly know that we need to try and get full involvement.
To respond to that, Rob Bell, that's interesting.
We had 5 lead authors and 9 cooperating authors from a number of different disciplines. So, and we had councils on board, and we had a working group with a number of people from councils that looked at the first and second drafts, and indeed the Ratepayers United groups had access to those drafts as well. So we were very open to that.
Sorry to put you on the spot. No, thanks, Nick. And I think in Hawke's Bay, certainly I think one of the debates we had was how do you balance a panel group with members living on the coast who are directly affected by it and more interested and willing to involve, with those who live further inland who perhaps aren't as affected but may get at least part of the rates bill at some point in future, and that's the hard thing to get right. Look, the next question is to you, Chris, if I can. Certainly I've found this in Hawke's Bay as well. Climate change and coastal processes are very complex and are often divergent views, oftentimes even among experts who are advising us. In that context, how do we make sure that communities actually understand the risks of climate change and coastal hazards?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So, look, I'll probably focus less on the technical experts. We probably can't always ensure that they are going to agree, and that's fine. I think one of the great things about the Clifton to Tangoyo project is we have all three councils involved together, and that's really showing a united front to the community, and we're all singing from the same song sheet. So I think that's a really powerful message. There's very few projects where we get that level of cooperation across all three councils, and I think it's really good to see that collaboration. When we talk about the communities and the community members, some of which have been in those panels, I think we do need to use a variety of methods. Not everyone wants to watch a technical PowerPoint presentation or read a technical report, so we have to be cognizant that everyone comes in with a different skill set and a different perspective. So we need different types of information, pre-reading before meetings, presentations, ability to talk with the experts if people aren't into sort of reading for a conversation, make some of those experts available for the random questions and side discussions. And certainly some field trips so people can understand and see for themselves and feel and touch some of the changes that may be experienced in the future. I think too, different perspectives, spoke about the coastal processes and technical people, but very much the social and cultural impact is important, and probably the more important aspects to a lot of people as well. So we need to explore those issues, and we need to provide the time and structured approach. I think one of the benefits of the Clifton to Tangoyo approach is really a structured approach of those 11 workshops to walk the community through the issues, and be all too much to try and just wonder what to do to solve the problem. So I think a good structure to take people on the journey is worthwhile. And also some general question and answer, so people can ask all the dumb questions which aren't dumb questions, and get the most out of the technical experts when they're available. One of the things that some of the guys were talking to me about earlier this week was around our hazard maps that we now produce, and people can sort of dial in through the web to find out what hazards are on those properties. They've been really good in sharing that information to people who are wanting to build a new house or wanting to buy a new section. One of the things that has happened has actually increased workload for us, having to answer a lot of those questions and queries. And sometimes we can be a bit rough with how we put model outputs into those GIS layers, and some of the edges aren't quite right, and that can actually work against us because people know intuitively that hazard isn't going to behave in that certain way. So we can probably do some tidying up there, but I think, overall it's just understanding people are different and need a wide range of methods to effectively communicate.
Maybe just another thought on that, I guess, to make up for putting in the spot before, Rob. I would just say that I think in our process, having the likes of Rob Bell available to our panellists was quite useful. He was an independent voice, is there as a nationally funded Science Challenge project research team member, rather than a on-payroll council consultant. So I think having that independence available as a check and balance really helped add, the confidence in the science we were presenting. Look, Ian, a question for you. We've been engaging, we had this question before actually, so it's another chance to have a crack at it. We're engaging communities on managing coastal hazards. How do you ensure the views and needs of future generations are taken into account?
I think, Simon, you really have to engage people in a meaningful way with stories that they can understand, rather than at a council in a science sense. we're sort of mandated to be thinking 50, 100 years, and we're kind of in that mindset, and we kind of understand that, and we kind of assume that that's, you know, the way everyone's thinking, but in fact, if you arrange a community process, people have got mortgages to pay, kids to pick up from school, they've got other concerns, they're totally focused on, you know, often on what they need to do to get through the day and through the week. And it's really important to engage people in a meaningful way with ways that they can understand what are the implications going to be for their children, for their grandchildren, and have those discussions from that sort of level rather than coming at it with the technical science. And I actually think that, and you know, we haven't been this particularly great at this, but we haven't been particularly good at bringing in the youth voice into these discussions. And I know there's a bit of work to try and do that, but in my role I do a lot of talking to school groups and to universities. Those kids get it, you know, they understand the issues, they know what they're facing down the track. But I think often we discount their voices because they're not vested, interested parties. They don't have property, they don't have investments, there's not money involved. So I think we need to give them the legitimacy to have their voice and their say within these processes as well, whatever that might be, whether it's through a community consultation, whether it's a council consultation. I think we need to allow them to have a legitimate voice around the table as well. Because at the end of the day, they're inheriting us.
The trick is how, right? I think if I look at our Hawke's Bay example again, in our panels, the average age was probably 65, maybe. But you know, I guess those forums are very much geared towards, no offence to anyone. Sorry, Anne, you're just kidding. 50.
I think there's been quite a lot of work done in the last few years in ways that we can use gaming methods as a way to help people understand long-term issues, but also to engage with youth. And there have been some examples in our region using Lego as a way of connecting with youth. But there's also, I've seen the Minecraft game has been used as a way of helping people plan for future changes. So there's a lot of research looking at how we can use other methods rather than just talking and PowerPoints and discussing. So there are other ways to engage with people, I think.
Okay, one more question before I open up the floor, and Jackie, this is to you. How can councils facilitate or achieve an inclusive and collaborative engagement process?
Good question. 3 things come to mind. Firstly, once you've identified your community, I'd really strongly urge you to get to know them. If you don't know them, talk to others who do, and councils are great at this. We have inroads into communities like no one else does. If you don't know them, then talk to the roads people, because they will. Talk to the parks and rec people, because they will. There's people in your council who will know your community, and the information they can give you about them is really, really helpful. Other things you can do is tap into residents' associations. They're not always completely representative of their communities, but they're pretty much always motivated and organised groups. I'd say sports teams, schools, find hubs in your communities that have people with influence and mana, and talk to them about the process you want to do. Share with them your hopes for this, I guess, and then get them working for you. You don't have to do all the work yourself. Secondly, I'd say trust. You need to build trust. Councils are often big, faceless, and intimidating to deal with. Your community may have had a bad experience with your council, and in that situation you're going to have to rebuild trust and break down those barriers. My advice on building trust is turn up and be human. It's always a great start. Speak and write in plain English. They don't care about our long-term plan process, and nor should they have to. Spend time with people and respect their time. That goes a long way. Small things like phoning them, visiting them instead of emailing, that goes a long way in building relationships and trust also. And thirdly, I'd say once you've established your process, let the community own it as much as you can. Let it be their process. I like to be quite organised, and I want to have everything set up before our community workshops, and our group at Mākara turn up at least half an hour early for everything. And really, kind of initially freaked me out a little bit because I thought, no, we're not ready. But actually, they got stuck in. They set up the chairs, they set up the bags of the catering, they hand out the agendas, they communicate and talk with each other, and it's theirs. It's their community-led program, and council's facilitating it. And I think that's exactly how it should be. I think let the community do the real work. You're there to facilitate and support them, not to manage it.
Thank you. Okay, look, I think it's a good time to go to the floor for questions. How long have we got, Grace? 9 minutes. Okay, yeah.
Anna Kerno from Kaikoura District Council. I have a question. Everyone has been referring to the time that these processes take. And obviously, being a political environment, we operate in a 3-year cycle. How do you protect these processes from political change?
It's a very good question. Who wants to have a go at that one? Ian.
I could start. Part of the motivation for developing a regional hazard strategy that we all sign up to is exactly that. That the fact that the idea is that it's a living strategy that will carry on through electoral cycles, and we can't have people say, oh, we don't like that, we don't want that happening. Well, we've all agreed to it. So that was part of that thinking there, was actually to set up a process that could continue through that.
And I would add that I think that is one of the challenges is the political environment, and certainly, as happened at County, where things go wrong, then you do have to be very brave. Politicians do have to stand with the staff and community. So it is challenging.
I'd also add that I think you can have a role in helping politicians be leaders in this, rather than strictly politicians. And if they have a leadership role, it's important.
Any other questions from the floor? Yeah.
Al Mackey, Whakakariri. Question for you, Jackie. This, your role as Climate Adaptation Manager, fairly new concept for most councils. Tell us, where do you sit in the pecking order amongst management? What department do you belong to, and who do you answer to? And have they given you enough authority to do what you want to do?
I've got some of my councillors here. I think we're very lucky. So I sit in a very empowered team, and our councillors have given us the mandate to as I was trying to sort of get to before, they're leading this, but they're leading from the side. And so that enables us to let the community lead from the front. And we're asking the community to come up with these solutions. We don't really know what implementation looks like yet, and I suspect that's where it's going to get really tricky. And we haven't addressed who pays part of it yet either. But for the process, I'm certainly nowhere near the top of the pecking order, and it's not relevant actually, which has been great.
Any other questions? Oh, there's one more, yeah, Rob.
Just how can we use long-term plan processes and asset management plan processes to help bolster the engagement we have with our communities on climate change adaptation?
I'll have first cut that if you like, actually. So, and relating to Hawke's Bay experience, we're conscious that to date the process has been quite targeted and not with every ratepayer who may contribute at some point. So like our process here is to use the LGP or the LGA to consult on the whole package once it's all pulled together. So we'll actually use that mechanism to consult with all ratepayers to say, look, here's what it means for you as a directly affected party and someone further back. So it's a mechanism to reach, I think, a much broader audience than a panel can achieve. What I would say.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, in our recent LTP, we certainly asked questions about climate change and, that was part of our strategic context that we went out to discussion with the community on.
Yeah, so certainly I'm familiar with Napier's LTP, and I guess the discussion is commencing. So the fact that there's a study going on and some of the risks are now actively being talked about, both in the infrastructure strategy and the LTP. And I think as new versions arrive and more information is available, we'll see the results of the study get folded into both the infrastructure strategy and LTP going forward. So I think there's a good basis there for some council.
I think it does highlight, though, some of the challenges that councils have in talking with groups within their own councils. I mean, we're doing a lot in the water space at the moment, and it's becoming rapidly apparent to us that if we're going to be challenging and tackling issues around water quality, we can't just carry on with that internal council structure that we've had. We're actually having discussions about whether we need to restructure the whole way we do business. And I see exactly the same in hazards. I mean, our steering group has got some infrastructure and water and people around the table, but it's very hard having those discussions with infrastructure across an organisation which isn't geared up to be, having those cross-party discussions. So I think as councils go forward in this, we might see we might have to restructure internally.
I know as lunch is coming up, so I've got time for one more question, and then we'll break for lunch. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Brett Manning, Chief Engineer at the South Taranaki District Council and occasional Group Controller at Civil Defence at Taranaki. Just picking up on that point then, is there one element we haven't talked about here is around civil defence management and hazard planning, which is very much a necessary process that links into this. So my question is simply, is there opportunity to now align the civil defence group planning process, which occurs every 5 or 10 years, along with the long-term planning, and that way communicate more consistently with the community?
We've worked pretty closely with our civil defence, because this is one of the other strings within that discussion, which we picked up on early, is that civil defence often, they've got 4 R's under their CDM Act, and they've often been very good at the response and the readiness. The whole reduction R, which incorporates a lot of RMA planning, is just not being within their gambit, basically. So part of what has motivated some of the work we've been doing is working closely with civil defence to align the work that we're doing with them to support them to fulfil that first R, that reduction process. So they're looking at a sort of a holistic reduction, a recovery-centric sort of a approach in our region, and we've joined up all our civil defences, so it's one body, and so we're communicating quite closely with them. In fact, they're in our steering group as well, and we have reported into their joint committee. So I think there are certainly some lessons there about working with civil defence, helping fulfil their roles.
Okay, well, let's wind it up and we'll break for lunch. Look, a big thank you to our panellists. I really enjoyed the discussion, learned a lot from it, and look forward to talking over the break. Thank you.